Welcome to this explainer. Right off the bat, we're diving deep into a really profound piece of source material that unpacks the hidden language of fatherhood. Today, we're exploring a deeply moving text that actually stages an imaginary conversation between iconic figures. We're talking Atticus Finch, George Bailey, Tevye, King Lear, and a modern working father. Together, these voices unpack this incredibly universal family dynamic that so many of us experience, but honestly, so few of us ever talk about. We are going to look at the immense burdens, the unspoken words, and the hidden sacrifices that truly define the role of a father.
Okay, let's start with a really powerful question from the text. What if the man you thought was emotionally absent was actually carrying more love than he even knew how to express? You know, when we're young, we're super perceptive, right? But our interpretation of things can be pretty flawed. We notice what a father doesn't say. We notice the strict rules, the silence at the dinner table, the times he just seemed a million miles away. But this source material asks us to pause and rethink that. What if that distance wasn't a lack of love at all, but rather a love that was just incredibly heavy, trapped behind a massive wall of duty?
This creates a massive illusion in how fatherhood is perceived. On one side, you have what the child sees, the tired face, the short answers, the strict rules. But underneath all of that, the father is fighting a huge hidden battle. He is worrying constantly, but not explaining it so his kids don't feel the weight of it. He's hiding his own fear, just so the house can feel safe. He's utterly exhausted from providing. The text points out that a father often fights a massive battle before his kids even open their eyes in the morning.
Which leads us perfectly into part 1, the mask of silent pain.
The core idea here is that fathers often mask their vulnerability to protect their families, mistakenly believing that silent suffering equals strength. The modern working father in our text admits something pretty heartbreaking. He says that if he looks scared, his kids will feel scared. If he admits money is tight, they might stop asking for things. So, what does he do? He just swallows it. He puts on his armor, steps into his duties, and makes absolutely sure his family never sees the fear behind his eyes.
The King Lear quote from our text is just brilliant here. A storm hidden becomes a throne of loneliness. It perfectly captures the tragedy of pride. When a father believes he always has to appear large and certain and unshaken, he ends up creating a palace where no one actually knows how to comfort anyone. He hides his wounds to protect his child, but in doing so, he's inadvertently teaching his child that love means you have to suffer entirely alone.
Think about this contrast for a second. It is incredibly comfortable for a father to be needed. If a child says, "Dad, fix this," he knows exactly what to do, right? He grabs the tool, boom, he solves the problem. But if a child asks, "Dad, are you okay?" he freezes. Receiving comfort feels like exposure. It's terrifying to a man who has basically survived his whole life simply by being useful.
So this brings up a tough transition. If a father is doing everything right on paper, working, providing, protecting, why does a child still feel so disconnected? Why does his protective silence turn into his child's emotional starvation? Let's explore that in part 2, mistaking silence for distance.
The character of Atticus Finch really hits the nail on the head regarding this miscommunication. He says, one spoke through duty, one listened for tenderness. The father and child are literally speaking entirely different languages. The father believes his actions, like the repaired door or the paid tuition, are screaming, "I love you." But the child isn't listening for actions, they're listening for words. They're looking for a hug, a smile, a real sign of emotional warmth.
You have this huge disconnect where both sides are standing there with proof, the father with tired hands and the child with a lonely heart. The character of Tevye points out this exact tragedy. The father yells, "I worked all day," while the child cries, "You never listened." And the painful part? Neither of them is completely wrong. Love essentially gets stuck between them like a goat in a fence.
Unless a father translates his sacrifice into emotional words, the child is left guessing for decades. I mean, how is a child supposed to know that he turned down his dream job just to stay near the family? How do they know he wore the same coat for 5 years just so they could have new shoes? They don't. They just see a quiet man sitting in a chair, and they kind of assume he just doesn't care.
Which brings up a really dangerous philosophical question from the text. What does constantly providing actually do to the soul of a man? Because when a father's entire worth is tied strictly to what he can output, a very quiet, dangerous erosion begins to happen inside him.
That takes us right into part 3, the heavy burden of providing. Providing isn't just about supplying money. Our text defines it as a profound act of sacrificing one's own identity for the sake of others,
A father begins to measure his worth entirely by what he can give. As long as the lights are on and the rent is paid, he feels worthy. But, bit by bit, his own dreams become smaller, stretched incredibly thin by duty, until he really starts to wonder where the man he used to be actually went.
George Bailey's perspective is absolutely vital here. A man can spend his whole life being necessary and still wonder if he is loved. When you think about it, people come to Dad when they need cash, or a ride, or advice, or a repair. He is incredibly valuable in moments of crisis, but what happens when nobody needs anything? If a father is only loved for his function, he's going to absolutely dread the day he's no longer useful.
There is a massive danger in reducing a complex human being to just a wallet or a repairman. The text uses a great analogy. A roof never gets asked if it's tired of the rain. If no one ever asks a father what he needs, his silence can quickly turn from peace into resignation. He stops buying things for himself, he stops mentioning he's tired, and slowly he just disappears within the very home he built.
Tragically, this understanding usually arrives way too late in a family's timeline. We seem completely hardwired to miss the truth of our parents' lives until we finally step into their shoes.
This brings us to a tough reality in Part 4, the cost of late gratitude.
King Lear drops another profound truth here, reminding us that few pains are heavier than gratitude that arrives after the moment has passed. Recognizing a father's hidden struggles is a revelation that tragically comes when the words can no longer be heard. The child grows up, gets a mortgage, maybe has a sick parent or a child of their own, and suddenly they remember their father sitting quietly at the kitchen table, and it hits them like a ton of bricks. That wasn't coldness. That was immense, crushing pressure.
True maturity means holding both the child's past loneliness and the father's unseen sacrifices at the exact same time. You don't have to pretend you weren't hurt or lonely as a child, but adulthood gives you new evidence. You realize that the father who gave little advice might have just been completely terrified of saying the wrong thing. You realize the strict warning was actually just fear wearing a really hard mask.
So with all this heavy realization, how do we break this silence today? We absolutely don't have to wait for a hospital bed or a funeral to finally have these conversations.
Let's look at some actionable advice from the source in our final section, Healing Before It's Too Late.
Healing doesn't require a flawless, cinematic speech. It just requires an open door. The phrases recommended by the text aren't poetry, but they are incredibly powerful. If you're a child, simply saying, "Dad, I see what you carried," is often enough to reach a wound he's kept hidden for decades. And fathers, you have a responsibility here too. Saying, "I'm sorry I made you guess," or "I loved you more than I knew how to show," can completely change a child's memory of their past. Start awkwardly if you have to, but just start. A father's silence might have begun as a sacrifice, but love becomes a far greater gift when it finally finds a voice. I want to leave you with this provocative thought from our text. If your father's silence was actually a profound sacrifice, what words will you choose to break it before the final goodbye? Don't make the people you love guess forever. Pick up the phone, ask a question, and let them be known. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.